Yo, this is a quick and dirty ranking of the various Star Trek films and television series. Not something we normally do here, but we thought, hey, why not? Could be fun. Okay, so disclaimer. These are my personal rankings. They don't reflect the opinions of anyone else who's helped with this channel. And, your own mileage is going to vary. And that's okay, This is a subjective medium of art. Everyone's going to have a different opinion. Someone's worst is going to be your very best. And that's just the way it goes. After we get done with the rankings, I will update you on the various stuffs going on with the channel. And yeah, that'll be it. So let's start with the Star Trek series.
Hello? Hello?
Number 10, Star Trek Lower Decks. It is right there, right? I know the people that worked on this love Star Trek. You can see it. But for me, the overall effect was confusing. Instead of illuminating science fiction, we get a string of self-referential jokes. And that's okay if you like that sort of thing, but for me, it's dead last. And I hate that, I'm sorry. I know the people who worked on this worked really hard.
You know it, nothing like a cold beer after a smooth second contact.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah!
Number 9, Star Trek Picard. I really like the visuals and some of the performances are outstanding, but I don't think that the Marvelized blockbuster format works for story in the Star Trek universe in particular. Ultimately, the story didn't feel organic, and the weaponized nostalgia was just there to attract eyeballs.
I thought that I looked appropriately sinister.
No comment.
Number 8, Star Trek Discovery. The visuals in Discovery are fantastic. In fact, I don't think that a Star Trek show has ever looked this good before. And the actors are doing a pretty good job. But there's just something soap opera-y about it. And the show also uses a kind of Marvelized blockbuster format for telling stories that I don't think works very strongly. There's not enough actual science fiction and too many death fake-outs.
Your contrite words were insincere.
They were necessary.
Number 7, the Short Treks. The Short Treks is a very interesting side experiment for the Trek franchise. They're unconfined by the traditional space of a television series, both in scope and style and format. And I think it's yielded some very cool little stories. And I'm here for it. A Star Trek anthology series? Please, let's do some more of that.
Mother must find a warm, protected environment to ensure their survival. She senses something.
Number 6, Star Trek Enterprise. Enterprise. Sort of the vanilla toast of the Trek franchise. Enterprise was bogged down in canon in a way that only a prequel series can be. It was overly earnest and sometimes surprising series. There were several pretty great episodes buried in there. Enterprise course-corrected several times in its 4 short years so that each season is distinct enough from the one that came before it and the one that came after it. And so because of that, the series is in the bottom half of my list. I guess you could say that I just don't have faith of the heart.
Whatever you think you've been trying to keep hidden is going to come out. Is that what you want? Is that what you want?
Number 5, Star Trek the Animated Series. Star Trek the Animated Series from the early 70s is perhaps the weirdest choice to show up in the middle of anybody's list. Most of you would probably put it at the bottom, I'd wager. But I like it because it retains a lot of the character of the original series. It not only gave us some pretty good episodes and a really great Spock episode, but, it helped bridge the gap to the modern franchise, help link the chain, keep it fresh in people's minds. And for that, it's my number 5.
If you do not know me, then it is my task to teach you.
Just
once, I wish you'd let us use the stairs.
Number 4, Star Trek Voyager. This show, with an excellent, somewhat squandered premise of a ship lost in space, represents a decline in quality of the 3 great 24th century shows in the Trek franchise. Nevertheless, we get a great captain and crew, some truly interesting and great science fiction stories, and perhaps the best space salamander love story in the entire franchise.
But I have to admit, I'm not sure which one is the captain.
The female, obviously.
Number 3, Star Trek, the original series. Many of you would put this at the top of your list because it came first, but I don't suffer the sacred. I give TOS points for being the progenitor of it all, and there's some really great science fiction in this first series, and Spock is great, isn't he?
I have never before met a Vulcan, sir.
Nor I a work of art, madam.
But it dates. There are some things in the original series, stuff that was allowed on television in the 1960s that wouldn't fly today, and some of that is harder and harder to look at the older and older it gets. And for that reason, it's my number 3. But that's okay because, you know, Gene Roddenberry came along in 1986 and perfected this formula that he created with number 2, Star Trek The Next Generation.
And you have a pulse.
Star Trek The Next Generation is an absolute near-perfect remix of the original series from the creator who, through the years, lost control of his creation. This was an attempt to reimagine something that he had already, imagined, except he was given a freer rein to do so. This attempt to perfect his recipes stands out not just as the epitome of Star Trek, the poster child of the Star Trek franchise, but in terms of 20th century science fiction, this series really stands tall. It's one of those rare moments when the sequel is better than the original. And that's not to say that there aren't, a few bad episodes and some really bad episodes. Some elements of this show are dated, less so than the original series. But it stands out as one of the great science fiction outings of the 20th century. And it's like warm comfort food.
A Betazoid woman, when she goes through this phase, quadruples her sex drive.
Or more.
Or more. Never told me that.
I didn't want to frighten you.
Number 1, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Where The Next Generation was a more perfect remix of the original series, Deep Space Nine comes in to do the difficult, serious work of questioning the very premise of the Star Trek franchise, and it does so with an expert hand. It has some of the best characters and character work in the entire franchise. The slow boil of a long story across multiple seasons is the right way to tell modern stories in this franchise, or anywhere, for that matter. Modern Star Trek should take notes. And the ultimate, the Dominion, as a dark reflection of the Federation, ties up everything in a lovely bow. If the future is going to be a paradise, then what does that mean? How do you maintain something like that? DS9 explores that question.
On Earth, there is no poverty, no crime, no war. You look out the window of Starfleet headquarters and you see paradise. Well, it's easy to be a saint in paradise, but the Maquis do not live in paradise.
So that was my personal rankings for the various Star Trek series. Your mileage will vary, certainly, and that's okay. But let's do the Star Trek films.
Para hablar con el operador, por favor, oprima el 0 en cualquier momento.
Number 13. Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. What does God need with this movie? Seriously, why? The underpinnings, the basic ingredients are interesting, but this film needed a lot of work.
We have traveled far!
Number 12, Star Trek Insurrection. Star Trek Insurrection is an example of the many instances where the people in charge of the franchise, at the height of the franchise's powers, said, you know what the problem is? We've drifted too far from our roots. And so they did something that looked like, that they thought was going back to their roots. Maybe it really wasn't. And that's probably why the film failed. Star Trek Insurrection is like a Next Generation Season 6 two-parter that we've all forgotten about.
I thought subspace weapons were banned by the Kittimer Accord!
Remind me to lodge a protest.
Number 11, Star Trek Beyond. In many ways, this film is the blandest, least offensive Trek film. It has some nice character stuff when compared to the other films in the Kelvin timeline, but this film is nakedly, almost cynically committed to the blockbuster formula without any real good reason why. This film needed less motorcycles and more gods in need of starships.
I ripped my shirt again.
How'd it go?
Number 10, Star Trek Into Darkness. This bizarro madcap remix of The Wrath of Khan fails on almost every level. It's almost offensive, but at least it's pretty to look at. Fun fact, this film violates all the known laws of physics.
Per Starfleet regulation, I'm planning on returning Khan to Earth to stand trial.
Well, shit. You talk to him.
Number 9, Star Trek 2009. This sort of soft reboot is pretty to look at, but it fails the minute you start thinking about any of the details. Ultimately, this attempt to put the Star Trek formula into the blockbuster format doesn't really work, but it set the tone for all the future Star Trek stuffs that would come after it. So that's something.
How the hell did that kid beat your test?
I do not know.
Number 8, Star Trek Nemesis. An emotional send-off film with an interesting premise and theme that, while flubbing some of the details on plot, still manages to have some of the better scenes of the next-gen cast, especially in the deleted scenes, which should be reinserted into the film in a director's cut. And that whole four-wheeler adventure Picard goes on, yeah, let's go ahead and take that out.
He's a clone. They probably used a hair follicle or a skin cell.
Why? I intend to find out, number 1.
Number 7, Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, the first truly good Star Trek film on this list. Star Trek VI shows us that Nicholas Meyer might be the best creative contributor to the Star Trek franchise ever. The writing, the plot, the filmmaking, the lighting, the camera movement, the blocking. This is a pretty good film and a near perfect Star Trek outing.
They don't take girls.
Number 6, Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. A lovely little Trek film that is the first true second chapter of what would become the Star Trek franchise, after Star Trek II basically pumped life back into everything. Star Trek III's job was to figure out a way to continue the story so that there would be a franchise on the back of Star Trek II. And it's mostly successful.
Computer, destruct sequence 1, code 1, 1A.
Number 5, Star Trek First Contact. A solid, fun movie that leans into the blockbuster format, but mostly successfully, and plays with Picard's trauma concerning the Borg, again, with success. The one detriment to the whole thing is the very existence of the Borg Queen, a component I feel cheapens the Borg. But this is probably the best Next Generation film.
Who? Those bionic zombies you told me about? The
Borg.
Borg? Sounds Swedish.
Number 4, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. Again, peak Star Trek. An excellent story, fun, earned character moments and comedy, an important message about conservation, because what is Trek if it isn't preaching to the choir a little bit? Again, we see that Nicholas Meyer, who co-wrote the screenplay, makes great Trek.
You mind stopping that damn noise?
Number 3, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. This is perhaps the best crafted, leanest, most fun Star Trek movie. This is the one you can teach in a film class. And yeah, here's Nicholas Meyer again, making a truly great film that happens to be a Star Trek movie.
Don't grieve, Admiral. Just logical. The needs of the many outweigh
the needs of the few.
Number 2, Star Trek Generations. An admittedly rough, unfinished story, but a movie that resonates with some truly Trek, truly humanistic themes. This film discusses that awkward final step into adulthood, the acceptance of one's mortality, which is rare in Trek and even rarer in film, generally. And like Nemesis, it has some truly great character moments.
We're all gonna die sometime, just a question of how and when. You will too, Captain. Aren't you beginning to feel time gaining on you? It's like a predator. It's stalking you.
Number 1, Star Trek The Motion Picture. Now, I know a lot of you wouldn't even dare try to appreciate this film, but for me, this is the most Star Trek film of them all. And it's the most sci-fi of the Trek films. It's about an incredible unknown circumstance that, in the end, came from us, and in the end, transforms us. That is some golden age sci-fi goodness. Admittedly, I recommend that you only watch the director's cut.
Voyager 6. NASA. National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
So, those are my personal rankings. They're probably different from yours, and that's okay. Like I said, this is a subjective medium. In fact, why don't you tell me your personal rankings? Type them out in the subspace below, and let me know why you're ranking them the way that you are. I'd like to know. In the meantime, go check out a YouTube channel called Classic Flicks, run by Jay Manning. There, myself and Brandon Phibbs of the 9 Days in July podcast and my co-hosts on the Wiki Surfer podcast discuss each Star Trek film in turn with Jay. These are actually very good. You could learn a thing or two about like how movies are constructed and about what's working and what isn't working. Anyway, I recommend you go there. The link for the playlist for these discussions will be in the subspace below. We have, coming up, several big video essays. Topics include time travel, religion, a deep dive on the Prime Directive, and the history of a famous Trek species. In the broader sci-fi world, we aim to tackle Tales from the Loop, The Mandalorian, examine the story imagery of Jedi Knights, and world building in The Expanse, and the wealth gap as illustrated in sci-fi. For 2021, we aim to have a broader selection of sci-fi topics for the channel. Coming up outside the channel, it looks like we might have a presentation at DragonCon 2021, most likely virtual. And coming up very soon, at the end of February, we'll have a couple of virtual panels at the Miami International Science Fiction Film Festival. So definitely check us out in those spaces. Again, links in the subspace below. Outside of Trekspertise, our short film Garden of the Gods is completed, and we've started submitting the film to festivals. When we get into one, we'll announce it here, and if it's close to you and the pandemic isn't a concern, then you should totally check it out. If the pandemic isn't a concern, of course. Right now, many film festivals are doing a virtual component, so there's that. So that's it. Not our normal fare, but we thought it might be fun, so why not? Besides, this ranking will probably change in 6 months anyway. Just how it goes. As always, if this channel and its topics are of interest to you, if you enjoy this sort of thing, if you like our video essays, then consider supporting the channel over on Patreon. Our average monthly donation seems to be between $1 and $3 a month. And for that, you get our best, most polished, best edited video essays. Not a bad deal. You can find the link to our Patreon in the subspace below. Thank you, Thank you for putting up with this video. Wow, you guys are very nice.